Well, on that note, let's move on. I want to get some guidance for the young men who are alienated from history.
Yes, please, let's do.
From Matt Christman here, because so Jordan Peterson's been doing a bunch of messages to different folks. He did messages to the CEOs, messages to Muslims. This is from his message to the Christian churches, and he has a premise here about the moral weight of history that I want Matt to respond to as somebody who is passionate about history.
We're young men. That is not a phenomenon that can be easily accounted for. But let me try. Now, in the West, because of the weight of historical guilt that is upon us, a variant of the sense of original sin in a very real sense, and because of a very real attempt by those possessed by what might be described as unhelpful ideas to weaponize that guilt, our young people face a demoralization that is perhaps unparalleled. This is particularly true of young men, although anything that devastates young men will eventually do the same to young women. And that, in this era of antinatalism and equally reprehensible nihilism, is precisely the point.
Okay, that's probably enough of that. How did you and Chris avoid sort of falling into despair as you produced Hell of Presidents?
I mean, because we went with a materialist analysis, and that is what's lacking from all historical narratives, including his goofy bullshit. Because if you look at, there are people doing history, and they all are moral agents, and they all contain good and evil in different portions, and their lives are shaped by the decisions they make. But once they depart the historical stage, we're only left with the artifacts that they then imparted on us that we now have to make our world out of. And when looking back, the moral lens is absolutely useless to use. Determining good and bad people is useless. They're gone. They cannot do anything. And when you look structurally, you see just how little actual agency exists in these structures. For the vast majority of time, people are really carrying out roles that transcend their individual will. There are those moments of febrility, those hinge points that throw up possibilities, but those are punctuations of an equilibrium of stasis and sort of enslavement in a real sense for everyone, but of course not equally for everyone, and that's where the moral part comes in, and that is. But the moral question of where history has brought us is in what to do now. And the reason that like liberal anti-racist history does have this effect of alienating white men and making them feel this guilt is that if we don't have a political moment, right, and we don't have political action, a plausible path to political action that is in alliance with any idea of justice, restorative, making things better for people broadly. If that's off the table, which we all understand, subconsciously at least, is the case, then all of those morally urgent questions of accumulated past injustice can't be addressed meaningfully. We can't do it. What we can do, though, is assign blame. But of course, all the people responsible are gone. All we have left are their descendants, and therefore we can pick them. We can divide them by group and say who's most responsible for why things are so bad. We can spend the remaining political energy we do have, the ability to punish, the only thing we have, to make them pay for what has happened. And of course, the state's not actually doing that, but that is the fantasy of punishment that is conjured in the minds of a white guy who hears this history of their crimes. And it creates this idiot argument between a group that wants to build a fantasy narrative of morality where they're extricated from it, because yes, it's either POCs who feel I'm aggrieved by this system completely and therefore not responsible for it, even if I'm relatively privileged in its hierarchies otherwise, or white people who get to expunge their sense of guilt by acknowledging it in some trite way that doesn't do anything about their actual accumulated wealth, that doesn't take away their granted countertops. And the alternative, which says we're going to either deny the historical record or go through the looking glass and claim that that legacy of violence and exploitation and domination and slavery is a positive good that should we should model our society over now. And we're left trapped with those two options of violence and retribution and domination because the working class has departed the historical stage.
And it's really infantilized everyone's understanding of history because, like you said, like I mean, before people go through the looking glass, that you just have the mythologized version of George Washington never told a lie and that sort of stuff, as opposed to, like, I would say if people are really looking for a balanced view of history, Hell of Presidents is a great show because you go through like the actual like certain salutary parts of say a president's ideology, but also an understanding of like what the structure was that they were at the helm of.
Right.
And that's omitted when Jordan Peterson acts like it's just, Robin DiAngelo is the only one writing history books. We're kept that sort of, like, I'm just so pissed the way like people like Connor Friedersdorf of The Atlantic talk about Jordan Peterson as somebody we should send alienated young men to. It's like we should send them, frankly, to Chapo and Hell of Presidents.
I'm not going to say it, but you did. Yeah, like I've heard people say, people I respect say, what's the real harm with Peterson if people just clean their room? And honestly, if they do, that's not bad. You should have just listened when your mom told you, but whatever, as long as it happens at some point. The problem with Peterson is that there is this actual salutary intro of, get your own life together. And a lot of people who find the world oppressive and undealable realize, oh, if I actually pay attention to the things in my control, I can kind of build outward a capacity that then can give me confidence and that can rob me of some of that sense of paralysis. But it's limited by our conditions, and conditions are not going to change. That's what we all acknowledge. So there has to be a second part. And the second part for Peterson is, okay, so you've cleaned your room and things still suck. Why? And then he has this narrative, which is just a mirror image of the liberal hysteric narrative of villains and heroes, of individuals, of ill intent, warping our institutions towards evil. And that means you're not going to keep tidying your room and then moving outward and dealing with the frustrations and the thwartings of life in alienated capitalism. Instead, you have an open invitation to return to the fantasy realm and make a world where, I can distract myself from these intractable problems by trying to win the war of ideas online, by trying to be a knight errant against cultural Marxism. And that means you're right back in the dirty room. And like you look at this, the cycle of Peterson's public persona shows this. It's he cannot stabilize a relationship to his audience or himself because he cannot deal with the real frustrations of life without retreat to fantasy. And that is what the political dialogue, the dialectic between the two halves of the schizophrenic middle class psyche is a retreat to fantasy.
Yeah.
I just before we let you go, I just want to bring up one of my favorite moments from Hell of Presidents, which was y'all were talking about the campaign of William Henry Harrison, Tyler, what is it? Tippecanoe and Tyler
too. Yes.
And how they went across the country.
Log cabin and hard cider campaign.
I love that image so much. It made me frankly proud to be an American in the sense that, like, we've always just been this extremely sentimental nation that even in 1840, we were just, so devastated about like the end of the American way and our frontier spirit, even just so close to the revolution, we already had this kind of feeling that, the true America has been lost.
Of an encroached upon ideal. And of course, the very funny thing is that in that election, William Henry Harrison was the representative of the Whig Party, which was generally the party of Eastern finance and the merchant classes in the American cities, as well as land speculators in the Western states like Kentucky and Ohio and stuff. And the Democratic Party was the party of the yeoman farmer and the urban mechanic. It wasn't a working class party because the working class had not come into coherence yet, but it was the common party. This new concept of a common man that was only possible in the context of American dispossession and slavery. Couldn't do it in Europe with its society of orders. It's still structured land relationships, and that's the most important thing. But they were the party of the common man and the small farmer. But because the president at that time was one presiding over an economic crisis that the doctrine of the Democratic Party could not contend with, and it was also a fat, round little gentleman, a little lawyer from New York who wore scented doilies and had fat little hands, named Martin Van Buren, who was considered this decadent fancy lad. And then William Henry Harrison, who had been territorial governor of Indiana, and who was a Virginia gentleman, but was play acting as a log cabin rustic. And so you have the party of merchants and finance doing this pantomime of common man imagery, which persists throughout American history from that point. They also would have giant balls of twine that they would roll in their processions behind the model of the log cabin that they would be dragging by a donkey on a truck.
Man.
And then of course the hard cider. And it actually started because Democratic paper had impugned Harrison as a rustic and said the man, send the man back to his hard cider. And the Whig press picked that up and said, yes, he is the candidate of hard cider and log cabins, and then got to campaign on a cultural grievance. Those structures have been basically unaltered ever since.
Yeah, 19th century culture was wild. The first corporation I'm aware of from my hometown, Mandan, North Dakota, was the Sitting Bull's Log Cabin Company, which picked up Sitting Bull's Log Cabin after he was arrested and took it on tour. So
on that grind. That's right.
Exactly.
God bless him.
Matt Christman of Chapo Trapos and of Hell of Presidents. I can't recommend both those enough. You probably listen to Chapo, but check out Hell of Presidents. Very, very excellent show. Thank you so much for joining us today, Matt.
Thank you very much. If you want to string, whatever, I think they're on YouTube.